Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I did want to share this live look with you of the White House. This as President Trump's new tariff rates of up to 41% on U.S. imports from dozens of countries now is set to go effect on August 7th. There is still uncertainty over what the president could do, and the way ahead for China, for instance, which runs the largest trade surplus with the U.S. right now unclear after talks earlier this week in Stockholm did not produce a deal. President Trump has yet to say if he will extend an August 12th pause on the duties on Chinese products. Now, reaction from financial markets after President Trump's new tariff rates, it was muted. Benchmarks fell in Asia, with South Korea's Kospi dropping by nearly 4% after the tariff rate for the U.S. ally was set at 15%, and the U.S. dollar weakened against the Japanese yen, trading at more than 150 yen per dollar. So, of course, the big question is, how does this impact the average American consumer? What does this all mean? For more on that, I do want to bring in consumer strategist Lisa Miller. Thank you for joining us, Lisa, right here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks for having me.
So there's been a lot of high-level discussions, a lot of back and forth between the United States and various countries. The new tariffs now set to take effect on August 7th. Given that, though, sometimes it can feel a little bit removed from the average U.S. consumer. Can you break it down for folks, who are listening to this, wondering how is it going to affect my daily life? How is it going to affect my wallet?
Well, basically, as you know, I do consumer surveys every month to try to keep a pulse on how consumers are feeling. And obviously, the listeners out there, we're hearing the news as consumers about the tariffs and the interest rates and all these things. But what's interesting in my survey that I just got back a few days ago, about 6 in 10 consumers are actually very concerned about the interest rates. We know that just recently, there was a hope that maybe the interest rates were going to go down, but given the tariffs and the uncertainty in the stock market, the Fed didn't lower the rates. So about 6 in 10. But the tariffs are even a little bit higher for consumers. About 65% are thinking it's just going to hit overall higher prices. So there's definitely a lot of concern out there, Stephanie, about, as you mentioned at the top of it, it's the uncertainty of it all, and consumers are noticing.
And there has already been a trickle-down effect. Actually, when I was, driving in to work, there are commercials now, trying to promote the fear factor, saying, car prices could go sky high. So now is the time to buy the car before they become unaffordable. Should a consumer be concerned, or is it truly just that wait and see?
Well, what's interesting is, I always say that expression, average is awful in the data. And let me break it down a little bit further. So right now, the idea of the tariffs, there is a huge political divide. In fact, when I look at it, the difference between the fear of the tariffs versus Democrats and Republicans, it's about a 50-point difference. So let me tell you what that is. So I mentioned, that about half of Americans are concerned about the tariffs. Well, that number jumps up to almost 80% for the Democrats and just over 30% for Republicans. So those commercials, Stephanie, it is creating fear. But right now, we don't know how it's all going to shake out. And so I don't really love the fact that the commercials are talking about this pre-tariff, our inventories in stock, because I think panic buying is just never a good idea.
I agree. You definitely don't want to be reactionary in all of this. As you were mentioning, sometimes perception becomes reality. So whether a consumer should be fearful or not, it almost doesn't matter. It's how they react. Talking about the job market specifically, we were talking about a whole host, but that also impacts, I would imagine, the confidence for companies to want to hire additional folks if they aren't sure, how all of this might impact their business. Are we seeing any changes in the strength of the job market?
Well, definitely there's just mixed signals everywhere, Stephanie. And so what I really focus on is, how does the consumer feel? And you are spot on. And the way I think about it from a consumer view is attitudes lead behaviors. And so right now, as I mentioned on tariffs, there's this big divide. It's become a political issue, the tariffs, and how consumers are and taking in this information. But on the interest rates, it's actually quite different. You know, that the political divide isn't really there, but the people most concerned about interest rates are more, families are very concerned about interest rates. The millennials, even Latinos are very concerned. And all of that kind of trickles into then, okay, do I staff up or do I not? And so this uncertainty, I just say, is not good for the economy in general, because uncertainty, people pull back their spending, companies might pull back their inventory, they pull back their jobs. So uncertainty is just not really good for the economy.
And it's not good for the average person. It becomes very stressful. But your polls absolutely lend a lot of insight into all of this. Is there anything else that you're keeping a very close eye on in terms of the pulse of consumer confidence when it comes to all of these issues? I mean, it's not just one. It's not just the tariffs, as you mentioned. Yes. It's also the interest rates.
Well, thank you for asking that, Stephanie, because in these monthly surveys, the other thing I ask about is just their general kind of consumption. Are you out there spending as usual, or are you anxious and very anxious about the economy and you've stopped the spending? I will say that January through July has been a little bit of a roller coaster, but what I'm seeing is that the height of anxiety around the economy was in March. And what I've seen in just June and July, that anxiousness, that, very anxious, that number has actually come down even just 4 points between June and July. And that's a positive. So here's my take on that, though, Stephanie. People are just like tuning out. Originally I'm like, school's out for summer, people are just kind of tuning out. But I don't know if people are just kind of numb to it right now and just kind of wait and see. But I'll take the good news that the anxiousness is down a little bit relative to spending. So
any little bit, Lisa, helps. If we can be a little less anxious, we'll take it. As always, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Have a good one.
You too.